Former Penn State football stars Olu Fashanu and Chop Robinson are set to be selected in the opening round of this year's NFL draft. But between Fashanu and Robinson, which player is going to be selected first?
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
There are plenty of intriguing prospects from Penn State football that are entering the 2024 NFL Draft. And let's bring on an expert to discuss just that. This is Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, and thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Help me welcome him back from Pro Football Focus, Max Chadwick. He is the college football analyst. He's also the host of PFF's college football show. Max, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it to get this perspective around these Penn State football players going into the pros.
Absolutely, Zach. And I know I've said this before on your show, but I grew up and still am a lifelong Penn State fan. So it's always awesome talking Penn State football with you. And actually, I'm going on an Ohio State podcast in about an hour now. And let me just say, I'm way more excited to talk about Penn State football with you than I am to talk Ohio State football, even though they look like they have a great team right now. But yeah, like I said, I'm a huge fan of Penn State, always have been, and I'm pumped to talk with you, man.
I definitely appreciate that. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Okay, Max, let's go right into it. As far as we'll start with the prospects that are going to be at the top of the draft versus the ones that are going to be selected later, as well as the undrafted free agents, and just kind of it's an overview of where they're going to be selected, best fits, all of those things, and what makes them stand out as a pro football prospect. Olu Fashanu and Chop Robinson are most likely both going to go into the first round. I had some thoughts on Theo Johnson, which I'll get from you, but that we'll save that for the upcoming segment because these two are all but guaranteed. Now, what's the debate here? Because Chop Robinson, I think, has all the potential in the world. It's nothing against Olu Fashanu, but is there steam ahead of the draft where Chop Robinson could actually get selected higher in your mind as opposed to Olu Fashanu? Because I think that Robinson, like I said, just has the higher ceiling, and Olu Fashanu has been dealing with some injuries in this draft process. So I believe that Robinson could be picked slightly higher. But what do you think?
I would be very surprised if that happened. I think Olu Fashanu is going to be a top 15 pick in this draft. Chop Robinson, I'd more predict being at the last 5 or so picks of the first round. Like I think there's a chance that I don't think he should, but I think there's a chance that Chop even falls to the second round. Honestly, I don't think it will happen. I honestly would take him the first round as well. But I think there is a slight chance that he falls to the second round. I do not think there's a chance at all that Olu Fashanu falls to the second round. I think he's going to be a top 15 pick. I think Olu, obviously, as a pass blocker, is unbelievable. He might be the best pass blocker in this draft. He's got a super high ceiling as a pass blocker. Run blocking is going to be a work in progress, as it always has been with him. But pass protection is way more valuable in the NFL, obviously, in a pass-happy game. So that's why he's going to be a top 15 pick. Chop is a super high ceiling guy, unbelievable athlete. He actually really produced really well as a pass rusher, too, in terms of win rate and pass rusher grade and all that. The problem is that he's winning really exclusively off his athleticism right now. So he's kind of a boomer bust player in a lot of ways, which is why I think there's some teams that could be lower on him. But I would take him in the first round because I think his ceiling is really high, and he's shown that he's been a really productive player, even with not that many pass rushing moves to speak of. So, yeah, I think those are the two guys I think that Penn State has that are going to be, or at least have a chance at being first-round picks. I don't see anyone else really sneaking into that range. And I do think both of them will end up being first-round picks. But I think the difference is Olu Fashanu will be a top half of the first-round pick. I think Chop will be a back half of the first round, one of the final picks of the first round, if I had to predict right now.
Olu Fashanu, I think, for the longest time was in that back-and-forth debate between who was the best offensive lineman in this draft. Joe Alt was the other candidate there. And it seems like Alt has solidified the top spot as the best pure offensive lineman in this group. Is there something that Olu Fashanu is lacking as compared to Alt?
Yeah, I think it's the run blocking. I honestly, I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but I've never been on Olu versus Alt. I always thought it was a clear gap between Alt and Fashanu. I think Alt has always been the number one tackle in this draft. I'm happy that he's finally getting recognized as the consensus top guy. I think Joe Alt is maybe the best tackle we've seen since Penn Sewell back in 2021. Like I think he's that special of a prospect. He's unbelievable. he tested out as like a 99th percentile athlete. So he's an unbelievable athlete. And then also he's a dominant pass blocker and a dominant run blocker. Whereas Olu, like I just said, really good pass blocker, and he's comparable to Alt in that aspect. But as a run blocker, it's not even close. So that's why I think Joe Alt is pretty clearly the top guy. And also you can make the argument Alt is even more athletic than Fashanu is. So like I said, it's rare that a guy is dominant at both run blocking and pass blocking. And when they are, they're going to be taken in the top 10, which is why Joe Alt will be a top 10 pick. Olu Fashanu, Talisa Fawanga, who's the opposite of Fashanu, in that he's a really great run blocker. Still some work to do as a pass blocker, though. Those guys I think, are going to be more top 15 picks right now. So, yeah, I've never been on the train that it was close between Fashanu and Alt. I always thought Alt was the clear guy. But I do think Olu's getting a little bit slept on right now. I've seen some people have guys like Fawanga above him, which I think I'm okay with. But other guys, I've seen like Troy Fatanu from Washington above him. I don't agree with that at all. I still think Olu Fashanu deserves to be a top 15 pick. And I ultimately think he will be a top 15 pick on draft night.
If he is inside of that top 15, I mean, I've seen almost every single projection put him with the New Orleans Saints. What are maybe 2 or 3 teams that would be ideal landing spots for him? And where do you think he ultimately goes? I think that maybe Las Vegas could be in the cards as well, with a little bit of a pun intended.
I think that's definitely possible. I think the possibilities for Olu start at number 10 with the Jets. I think there's a chance that I don't think it will happen. I think they're going to go weapon. I think they're going to go Brock Bowers.
Yeah, with Aaron Rodgers. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Get Rome Odunze or something like that if he's somehow there too. Because they addressed offensive tackle. That was by far their biggest need. They addressed it with Tyron Smith and trading for Morgan Moses. But the issue is both those guys are older. Both those guys have had extensive injury histories. And both those guys are only on 1-year deals right now. So it's not like the future of offensive tackle is set in New York. So I think there's a possibility they still go tackle at 10. I don't think it's likely, though, at this point. But I think you're right. I think the Raiders at 13 would make a lot of sense as well. Maybe I don't think they would prefer Fashanu because I think they go for a right tackle, but maybe the Chargers, if they trade back from number 5 at number 11, could be possible. I think they would go with Talisa Fawanga, though, because they kind of need more of a right tackle with Rashawn Slater playing left tackle. I think the Raiders at 13 are certainly a possibility. And then I agree with you. Like the Saints at 14 is the most likely outcome right now. I think that's where he's going to go. And then I can't see him going much farther past 18 to the Bengals, maybe. I think there's a spot that he would go, that he definitely would be taken there if he's there. But I think 14 to the Saints, that's been kind of the most common one right now. And I think that's most likely where he's going to end up on draft night.
And from the Penn State perspective, no matter what NFL team is going to draft him, at the end of the day, you're getting probably the most intelligent, like overall, like if we're talking about pure, smart brain power, Olu Fashanu is by far the most intelligent prospect when it comes to football and just in general. You are getting a cerebral type of player that is going to be a locker room guy. He's going to be a team player above all else, someone who's selfless on top of the talent, the skill set that you mentioned of what you're getting in a left tackle, as opposed to a right tackle, someone who is going to be an exceptional pass blocker. But what you're getting is someone who's just going to continue to learn and continue to get better. And he's still, he almost came out into the last year's NFL draft at 20 years old. So he is going to have a long career in the NFL. Now back to Chop Robinson, who I believe you and I agree that he should be a top 20 prospect, but it sounds like NFL teams aren't exactly convinced here. At the end of the first round, again, I've seen projections of defensive line or at least pass rusher needy teams. The Tampa Bay Bucks make a lot of sense here, Max. What are some other possible spots that he could be selected?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. Real quick on Olu, I just wanted to bring up, because you mentioned the smarts thing. I actually was lucky enough to interview Chop and Olu last year. And Olu, when I was talking to him, I was like, dude, you could have been a top 10 pick. I've heard a lot of NFL teams had him as OT1 in last year's draft. And then obviously he decided to come back. And I was like, why'd you, most people would declare it. And speaking to his smarts, he was like, I want to earn my master's degree. Like, that's what I was going. It's like, dude, you don't see football players say, like, they are going to go and get to the NFL as soon as possible. He was like, no, I'm trying to, I'm more than just a football player. He's had an incredible, he's an incredible student as well. Unbelievable in the classroom. So yeah, just speaking to his smarts, not only is he a smart football player, he's also an incredibly smart human being as well. Great head on his shoulders. And his parents have done an amazing job of instilling that, hey, you're going to college to be a student. You're not just going to college to play football. And I think he's got a very bright future ahead of him, even if the the whole football thing doesn't work out for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
But going to draft Chop Robinson, yeah, I think he's going to be a late first round pick. I think the Buccaneers are the most likely landing spot right now. That's where I've seen a lot of mock drafts have him going.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are some other teams that could use an edge defender in the first round that I think is possible for him. So I think there are definitely some scenarios where he can go to a team like, let me look through right now. I think Arizona at 27, if he doesn't go to the Buccaneers at 26,
Mm-hmm.
I think Arizona also could use an edge defender. I could see them taking him at 27. He kind of fits that defense really well too. And they need pass rush juice, man. They have not had a good pass rusher in a while. So I think that would be a really fun spot for him. I think Detroit at 29, they could use a guy opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. That could be another interesting spot for Chop Robinson. So yeah, I think he's an interesting spot where I think there's a few places he can go. I don't really see him going higher than 26. I think the Buccaneers at 26 might be his ceiling right now. But I could see him going 26 to Buccaneers, I could see him going 27 to the Cardinals, 29 to the Lions. Maybe, and again, if he falls out of the first round, I think the Panthers, who really need an edge after trading away Brian Burns at 33, he could be the first pick of the second round. Honestly, I could see them doing that. But yeah, I think his ceiling is the Buccaneers at 26, and I also think that's probably where I project him to go right now in the draft too.
Now, there's still plenty of Penn State prospects, respectable ones at that. Theo Johnson, again, somebody else who has a lot of potential. And then Adisa Isaac going into the draft. Guys like Curtis Jacobs. We'll discuss more of them coming up after the break. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Have you ever had a nail-biting experience just to get tickets? Well, take that guesswork, take that stress away with Gametime. Say hello to Gametime, the authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. It is easier and cheaper to score seats with Gametime. Prices will drop as game time nears, so take advantage of these special deals on Gametime. I've used the Gametime app myself, whether it's for Penn State games or games where I am out of town, out of the area, and it is so easy and convenient to use Gametime. You can find Major League Baseball tickets. You can see views from all the seats and get killer deals. You can grab last-minute tickets up to 60% off or exclusive flash deals on select seats. With upfront all-in pricing, no hidden fees, and a game-time guarantee, if you find cheaper tickets elsewhere, they will credit you 110% of the difference, and they'll offer you event cancellation protection, job loss assurance, and 24-hour returns guaranteed. Ditch the guesswork and elevate your game day with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel, the official sportsbook of Locked On. It's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL. Baseball is back in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on each and every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets. That's right. That's $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose on FanDuel. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. And I can attest to that because I've used FanDuel myself. So what are you waiting for? All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So Penn State players could be very active on day 2 of the draft, especially with Theo Johnson, Adisa Isaac, who could be selected in rounds 2 and 3. Well, you might know that and more with the Locked On NFL Mock Draft, now available. Find the ultimate 6-episode series on the Locked On NFL Draft channel to hear what local Locked On experts are picking for each and every NFL franchise, with live reactions from college football experts and even the fantasy football angle. The Locked On NFL Mock Draft, now available on the Locked On NFL Draft channel on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to check out Max's work, you can visit Pro Football Focus. He is the college football analyst for PFF. You can also follow him on X as well. It's when I look at the day 2 possibilities, Max, again, from being the Penn State side of things, just seeing the way, I want to begin with Theo Johnson, because I thought Theo Johnson, the way he tested at the NFL Combine, and the way he showed out at Pro Day, and then just having all these different interviews, right? I thought, maybe could he sneak in at picks 30, 31, or 32? Okay, that doesn't seem to be the case. But he seems to be probably right there in the thick of it in round 2 because he tested almost in every upper echelon of the percentiles for what a tight end is. And the way that he was 6'6", 260 pounds. He runs a 4.5, 4.6, right? Top line speed. And it was just always crowded. Like Theo Johnson has always been an incredible prospect, an incredible football player. But then there was Brenton Strange, who turned into a second-round pick. Tyler Warren could be next year's first tight end off of the board. It's always been a crowded tight end room. And Theo Johnson is the next one to come out of Penn State and be one of those premier tight end prospects.
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. He's going to be a day 2 pick, I think. I kind of pump the brakes on the second round talk right now. I don't think he's going to end up in the second round. I think he's going to be a late 3rd round pick right now. I think obviously an unbelievable athlete. I think 99th percentile athlete is what Kentley Platt had in his relative athletic scores. He's a great athlete, really good size as well. Really good in vertical routes. He's got to be more consistent, I think, overall. And yeah, like I said, I think he was underutilized at Penn State, so that will probably push him down some boards. He just really hasn't had the great production that some of the other top tight ends in this class have, but the ceiling is there, man. The ceiling is absolutely there. So I think if I had to predict right now, I think there are going to be 2 Penn State players in the first round that we were talking about in Olu Fashanu and Chop Robinson.
Yes.
I think there will be 2 Penn State players on day 2 in Adisa Isaac and Theo Johnson. And I think Theo Johnson is going to be the 4th one taken out of those guys. I think Adisa Isaac will be taken higher than Theo Johnson, but I do think Theo Johnson will sneak into the day 2, but I think he'll probably be a late 3rd round pick right now if I had to predict.
So it's a matter of consistency here. I know that run blocking is kind of another concern, but I can't imagine, again, NFL teams or coaches and front offices stay in business by not selecting players that don't exactly fit their system. If you're selecting Theo Johnson to be an additional run blocker, then you're not doing it right, because clearly he is a Y. He's going to stretch, like he's too athletic for linebackers to cover, and he's too tall, he's too large with that combination of size and speed for safeties to cover at 5'11", 6 foot. So again, I think Theo Johnson's a matchup nightmare. I've seen the Jets link to him, right? He told us after Penn State's pro day that the Jets were talking to him, along with a bunch of other NFL franchises. I think he's interviewed with almost at least a dozen teams. The Jets make sense just because that's one of the ones that he told us. Possibly the Bengals, right? The Bengals are just a tight end needy team in this case, and they seem to want to continue to, especially with T. Higgins potentially moving. As we sit here right now, what's T. Higgins' situation? Joe Burrow would need another pass catcher. What's an ideal landing spot, since this is more of a, anybody could take him at this point since so many picks have gone by?
Yeah, it's gonna be. I think the Jets are definitely up there. I think the Colts could use a tight end as well. Now, if they don't take Brock Bowers in the first round, I think they're going to be looking on day 2 to find someone just to get more weapons for Anthony Richardson. So I think Colts are definitely a spot. I think Miami's a spot where they can take a tight end as well. So I think the Dolphins could be interesting. That'd be really
just from
fun.
Seeing what Mike Gesicki. Well, yeah, it might be a little the way they used Mike Gesicki, though. I don't mean to cut you off, but the way Mike Gesicki was used in Miami, that's just, and being, this being a Penn State show, it's like, man, not another Penn State tight end in McDaniel's system. It just feels they feel underutilized.
They do feel underutilized, and obviously they have unbelievable weapons outside of tight end that they throw to. But so it'd be kind of the same thing with Theo Johnson at Miami. But I could see, I think they do need tight ends, so I could see them being interested. Also, Miami, you got to think about it. Miami, all Mike Daniel cares about is athletes. I mean, you got 2 of the fastest receivers in the NFL in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. You got one of the fastest running backs in the NFL, and 2 of them actually in Devontae Chain and Raheem Mostert. And I think the offensive line is super athletic as well. I think Mike McDaniel's gonna be like, oh my god, let's get another freak out there. So I think I could see him being really enamored with a guy like Theo Johnson on day 2 of the draft. I think the Buccaneers is another spot that I think could use a tight end. Commanders could use a tight end. I even think the Vikings could use one outside of TJ Hawkinson as a backup. So those are a few spots I think that are possible for Theo Johnson, probably somewhere late 3rd round, maybe even early 4th round if he slips a little bit.
And then there's Adisa Isaac, who you mentioned is probably going to be selected ahead And that's why you bring you on, as the expert. I'm saying, hey, Theo Johnson, projects really well, has all the potential in the world. And you're like, pump the brakes a little bit.
It only takes one team, though. I mean, you might be right.
Yeah.
Like Brendan Strange, nobody thought Brendan Strange was going to be a second round
the
pick.
Jaguars.
Exactly. And then it only takes one team to fall in love with him. So you could be absolutely right. There could be a team in the second round that's like, hey, we want to get this guy in the building. So like I said, consensus right now seems like he's a late third round pick, but it only takes one team to fall in love with him and take him in the second round. So you might be right, honestly.
Adisa Isaac is another type of player, I would say, as far as a longer viewing period, if you will, right? To spec, because originally it was, he has the leg injury. We'll see how he does this season. He's probably a 6th or 7th pick just because he's a veteran guy. He's good at football, but we'll see how the athleticism holds up. Then he puts together the tape, and now it's okay. He's probably an early day 3 pick, and then now he's in the day 2 conversation as most likely probably a 3rd round pick here, just because he's an edge setter. I would argue that he's just balanced everywhere. He can stuff the run, he can set the edge, and he can rush the quarterback. Now, your pass rushing specialist was Chop Robinson, but Adisa Isaac, that dynamic tandem, the two of them together, were, I don't want to say unstoppable, but led to the fact of why Penn State led so many categories on defense with Manny Diaz's last season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you say 3rd round. I think you're right. I think early 3rd round's probably a good projection for Adisa Isaac right now. I would not be surprised if he sneaks into the 2nd round. I think there are going to be some teams that really do like Adisa Isaac. I think he's got to get a little bit stronger and get a little bit better of an anchor as a run defender. But he's got really good hand usage. I think he actually has been a really good pass rusher as well. Now, I don't agree with this, but our lead draft analyst, Trevor Sycamore, has put out his final big board. If you want to check it out at pff.com, I think he's the best draft analyst in the business. But something that he did put out that I think is a little bit crazy, he actually thinks Adisa Isaac is a better prospect than Chop Robinson. He has him above Chop on the big board. So I don't agree with that personally, but I think there are some people that really do like Adisa Isaac and like him as a 2nd round potential pick. So I think there's a chance Adisa goes in the 2nd round. And he's a really good athlete, 89th percentile athlete, 90th percentile athlete in the relative athletic score. Penn State, of course, I mean, their strength and conditioning department is the best in the country, maybe, or at least one of them. I mean, they produce freak athletes every single year, it feels like. So, Adisa Isaac's another one of them, man. I think he's going to be an early 3rd round pick, but again, I would not be surprised if he sneaks into the 2nd round because I think there are going to be some teams that really do like him.
Another situation where a bunch of selections are going to be made. So anywhere in the back half of the 2nd round, as you mentioned, late 2nd round, early 3rd. So there's a lot of give or take as far as what could happen and who could select him. I think the Detroit Lions come to mind again, since they have one of those early 3rd round picks. So relatively linked to Chop Robinson, and they need another. They just need another defensive end, a strong defensive end aside Aiden Hutchinson. So that's the team that comes to mind for me of who would be the best landing spot. What are some other ideal teams for Adisa?
Yeah, that's a great call. I think the Lions are a good one. I think again, the Cardinals, if they don't take a guy in the 1st round or even early 2nd round, I think they could go in the 3rd round potentially. I think there are a lot of teams. I think there's so many teams that need an edge defender that it's almost like wrong to cross out any teams. And I don't think he's going to be a high enough pick that you can be like, oh, that team definitely won't take a player in his 1st or 2nd round. So I think there's Cowboys could use another edge opposite of Micah, and I know they got DeMarcus Lawrence, but he's getting up there. The Broncos could use an edge. The Lions, like you said, I think there are a lot of teams in this draft. The Colts potentially, Jaguars. I think there's so many teams that can use an edge defender that I think it's kind of hard to pin down because he's not going to, like I said, he's going to be like probably picked in the 60s. So that's a lot of picks before him. So I can't really say, this 1 or 2 team is going to take him. But I think there's a lot of teams that you can use an edge right now. And I think it's easier to project him as it's where he will go in the draft rather than who will pick him. I think he's probably, like I said, late 2nd round, early 3rd round right now.
Hunter Nourzad, Caedan Wallace have gotten positive reviews over this draft process and have gone up boards for most NFL teams. Kalen King, on the other hand, has just over the time gone down. Formerly, originally a 1st round draft prospect projected. Now thought it was going to be day 2, most likely day 3. We'll discuss that on the other side of this break. Today's episode is also brought to you by Monopoly Go. We've all been there, either as a player or as a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard isn't looking so good, and you're feeling low. You're not sure if you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up, and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much money of my friends as I possibly can. That's right, the smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone, anytime, with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. Play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards, make your friends go bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball, and you can charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb that leaderboard. So get back out there, put your game face on, and download Monopoly Go. That's Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store and Google Play. Hunter Nourzad, Caedan Wallace, guys like Curtis Jacobs, Kalen King, all could be selected on day 3, should be selected on day 3 if they haven't already. And remember, you can subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams, all-encompassing discussions, as these guys aren't Penn State players anymore, but they're going to be in the NFL and they're connected to Penn State. So we talk about it here on this show. And Max, you can keep up with him on X. You can check out all of his work at Pro Football Focus for college football and then this draft analysis as well. So in this final segment, it's kind of looking at the wrap up of the final players that would still projected to be available. Again, Curtis Jacobs, one anonymous NFL scout had said, or GM had said, that Curtis Jacobs was a top 5 linebacker in this draft class. Kalen King was a former first-round prospect, seemed to be taken in that top 20 spot, given what he did alongside Joey Porter Jr., and then had a little bit of a down season this past year. But now, when you actually watch the draft process, it's not fun to talk about the offensive linemen, but the way that Caedan Wallace and Hunter Nourzad have really solidified themselves as quality prospects that could ultimately turn into NFL starters, teams and franchise have taken notice here. Max, if you had a preference between the two of who you would want on your team, and we're talking about intelligence again here, Nourzad is definitely another one of those prospects like Fashanu. If you want smarts, you take Nourzad, but Caedan Wallace has just put together, he had a roller coaster of a career at Penn State, but then ultimately settled in, became that veteran. That was a big loss for Penn State when he actually declared for the draft, and everyone said, it was split. Okay, hey, we need, new blood in at the right tackle spot. And I said, no, this guy is a true quality starter, and Penn State needed him. Now NFL franchises are going to get him, and I think, both of them can be solid NFL starters one day.
Yeah, potentially. I think Nourzad, I feel a little bit better about saying he could be a potential NFL starter. I think he's probably going to end up being a 5th-round pick. I think the big thing with him is he's got to get stronger. I think he's just not big enough right now to be a starting center in the NFL. He has great technique, though, and I do think he's got potential to be a starter down the line. Caedan Wallace has been kind of a riser in this process so far, a really good athlete. I think got to be more consistent in his technique, but I think he's got the athleticism to be maybe a starter down the line, either at right tackle maybe, or even guard, kick inside the guard. I think that could be even better for him. I expect Caedan Wallace to probably go somewhere in the 6th round, if I had to predict right now. And I think Nourzad's probably going to go 5th round. I think those two are going to be interesting prospects for sure. I think they have starting ability, but I expect them to go mid to late day 3 as of right now.
I mean, everybody can use an offensive lineman, right? Whether they're drafted with the intention of, hey, we just need some depth. We just need to build the offensive line any way we can, a good rotation. I don't think anybody is going to draft Wallace or Nourzad in mind of, yes, you're going to start day 1. Yeah. We need a center. We need a tackle. Again, Caedan Wallace, both of them offer that versatility. Nourzad played tackle to start his career. I know that was at Cornell, so that's a different story, but played guard at Penn State, slid over to center, made a nice, easy transition in just 1 year's time at Penn State. And then Wallace, again, can project a tackle at right guard, so that, or guard in general. So that versatility for him is what makes him a valuable prospect here. So I could sit here and say, like, hey, best fits for both. I've seen them linked all over the place, especially now that we're in rounds 5 and 6 here, Max.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to predict.
Who are the most O-line needy teams? Who are the most offensive line needy teams?
There's a lot. I think there's some team. I think there are some teams that the Colts, I think, could use some help at guard. I think, which is a spot that I think Caedan Wallace could potentially go to. I think Green Bay could still use some help on the offensive line. There's the Cowboys certainly need help on offensive line. They need to get a couple starters there. Probably Ravens could still use some start. They lost 3 starters on the offensive line. Didn't really add too much to replace them. So that's a spot as well. I think the Titans could use some help, but I know they're going to probably address it in the draft in the first round probably. But yeah, I think there are some teams like the Seahawks. Like I said, I think there are a lot of teams that could use help on the offensive line. Steelers for sure. That I think that they could be interested in. And those guys, again, it's so hard to predict when you're talking about 5th and 6th round players. But I do think there's a lot of teams that they could potentially fit in the NFL.
Let's pair them up again because we talk about the draft risers, but unfortunately they're stocked down for a couple of prospects here just because the original reviews were, hey, Kalen King is a surefire top 20 pick. Yeah. And then Curtis Jacobs, top 5 linebacker prospect in this entire draft going into 2024 by an anonymous NFL. I can't remember if it was a scout or I think it was actually a GM, a front office guy was really enamored with Curtis Jacobs. And maybe that anonymous GM is still in the front office and might take Curtis Jacobs higher than his projected landing spot. So what ultimately happened here, Max, from PFF, from your point of view? Why did Kalen King go from a 1st round pick to potentially probably a 5th round pick? And same thing with Curtis Jacobs. If you're a top 5 linebacker, you're going in at least the 2nd round, and now he's probably a 5th or 6th round pick as well.
Yeah, I think Kalen and Curtis Jacobs, in terms of the day 3 guys we're going to talk about, I think they're going to be the first 2 day 3 guys taken from Penn State. I think they're actually go above Nourzad and Caedan Wallace, I think. Kalen, man, it was a rough year for him. I mean, he entered the year, I thought my Waits early mock draft, I had him as a top 15 pick. And then also I had him as a 1st round pick in my all eligible mock draft last year, where everyone in college football is eligible 2023, 2024, and 2025 prospects. I still had him as a 1st round pick. I mean, I thought he was better than Joey Porter Jr. in 2022, honestly. And Joey Porter Jr. ended up being the 32nd overall pick in the draft. So I think Kalen King just had a really, really rough year. I mean, that Ohio State game, I mean, again, granted, it was Marvin Harrison Jr. who picks on anyone, but he did have a really bad game against Marvin Harrison Jr., which I think soured some teams. He also did not play well the rest of the year either. Then he goes out to the Senior Bowl, and he got dominated in the Senior Bowl, too. He did not play well at the Senior Bowl at all, which I think, again, really hurt his stock. So, yeah, Kalen King's had a really rough last year, and he went from a guy that I thought was going to be one of the top corners in this draft and a top 15 pick potentially. Yep. Now, like you said, he's going to be probably a 5th round pick. And, yeah, just I don't know if anyone – there might not be a single prospect in this entire – actually, I will say there hasn't been a single prospect in this entire draft that's seen their stock fall as much as Kalen King this year. It's really been unfortunate to see. Curtis Jacobs, I don't think had nearly the same hype that Kalen King had entering the year. And I still think he's going to be a 5th round pick. I think he's a good athlete. Got to get stronger in the run game for sure. But I do like Curtis Jacobs enough. I think he's got some intriguing tools that I think you could bet on. He's got to be a little more physical, but he's got really good upside. I think he could be a good special teams player immediately for a team. And I think he's going to get better in coverage as well. So got to get more physical, got to get a little bit stronger. But like I said, he's a really good athlete that I think a team will like to take in the 5th round. But yeah, I think those 2 I'd probably say are going to be 5th round picks in the draft if I had to predict right now.
Yeah, they're very good athletes above all else. And Kalen King, I think, where does he, I think his outlook is the most interesting here because I caught a little bit of flack for saying, hey, maybe Kalen King should move to safety, just given that because he has to be a press corner. He has to be a press corner because when you look at the numbers along the way, how is he going to be able to, and NFL teams are smart, they're not going to put him up against a Tyreek Hill or a Jalen Waddle, but I feel like that really boxes him into what kind of receivers he can guard if he's not going to be a press corner. So Seattle makes sense if they're going to take him. I think New England would make sense as well, the Patriots, given Gerard Mayo takes over. But where do you like him to land, or what teams might fit him best?
Yeah, I like him mostly in a man coverage scheme. And the problem with Kalen King, and I didn't mention it before, he actually didn't really test out that well at the combine either. He tested out like a 67th percentile athlete, which is like above average. Don't get me wrong. It's not like he's a bad athlete, but I think some people are hoping for more. So yeah, like I said, it's a really bad year overall. Like almost nothing went right for Kalen King this past year, which is unfortunate because I was able to talk to him last year too. He was a great guy, a great kid. I think a man coverage scheme would fit him best. I think Green Bay, who Jeff Hafley, who comes over from Boston College, is their new defensive coordinator. They don't really need a corner, but I think they could look at a guy like Kalen King, and Hafley ran a lot of man coverage at Boston College this past year. So I think he's a guy that Could be someone that they look at. I think the Browns ran a lot of man coverage. Again, they don't really need a corner, so I don't know if they would really look at him, but I think that's another one. I think the Commanders, again, team that ran a lot of man coverage, they also could use help at corner. That's another spot for him. I think Miami is another spot as well that could use some help at corner, and they ran a lot of man coverage as well, maybe even the Saints too. So, yeah, I think a team that runs a lot of man coverage, again, it's hard saying he's going to be a great man corner when he just doesn't have top-notch athleticism, but I think that's probably the scheme that I like him the most in. So I would say that those teams that run a lot of man coverage will be probably interested in his services when it gets to the 5th round or later, probably.
Max, let's finish up with this. Again, I really appreciate your time, but the final prospects, we're not going to go break them down player by player that we have, but there's Keaton Ellis, there's Trey Potts, there's Johnny Dixon, there's Daequan Hardy, and Alex Falcons. I don't want to leave him out as well, but those prospects maybe could sneak into the 7th round. Maybe Johnny Dixon, maybe in the back end of the 6th round, Daequan Hardy too. Daequan Hardy, I think, is the most, if you had, and I'm sure you agree, maybe it's Johnny Dixon for you, but Daequan Hardy, just because what he can offer now as a special teamer with the speed, the athleticism, hey, maybe we bring him in as a special teamer first, have him return punts, do some kick coverage, and then maybe he ultimately translates into a slot cornerback for us, a nickel cornerback, kind of the way that Nick Scott was a special teamer. And then the Rams ultimately graduated him to that starting safety spot before he moved to Cincy.
Yeah, I think I think the most likely guy to get drafted out of that group you just named is probably Johnny Dixon. I think Johnny Dixon is going to be a 6th round pick. Daequan is tough. Daequan, I think, is right on the border of being a drafted player. I think he's a guy that if he's not taken in the 7th round, I think he's going to be one of the first free agents to get signings. I think the teams will really like him. And I think for everything you just said, he's going to be a great special teams player, potential in the slot. I really was impressed by his tape in the slot. I feel really good about saying that Johnny Dixon will get drafted. Like I said, I think he's going to be like a 6th round player like Caedan Wallace. Daequan's a little tougher. If I had to predict right now, I would say Daequan does not get drafted. But like I said, I would not be surprised if he sneaks into the 7th round. So those are the two I think have a chance. I think Dixon for sure, I think has a really good chance of getting drafted. Daequan's a little bit on the fence right now. Anyone past that, I don't really think will get drafted. I think they'll probably be free agents. So I don't think any of the other guys you mentioned will be drafted. But Johnny Dixon and Daequan Hardy, I think definitely have a shot, with Dixon being more of a lock to get drafted, I think, than Daequan Hardy right now.
He's Max Chadwick of Pro Football Focus, host of Pro Football Focus's college football show. You can keep up with him on X as well and on YouTube. Max, thanks so much for the time. I appreciate all the in-depth analysis, helping me get a better look at what these Penn State players have in store for them at the start of their NFL careers. Thank you so much, as always.
Of course, Zach. No, I appreciate you having me on again, man.